Over 800,000 workers were thrown out of their jobs on October 1st when the government shut down, U.S. government shut down. Hundreds of thousands more were told to work without pay by their bosses. As Comrade Kathy has reported, 9 million mothers and their children who depend on the WIC nutrition feeding program were prevented from accessing information. Hungry families needing to enroll were just out of luck. What was Wall Street's initial reaction to this catastrophe? The same day the Dow Jones Industrial Average went up by 62 points. Even though the stock market has fallen since then by a couple of hundred points, is nothing like its reaction on September 29th, 2008, when it fell 777 points, when the TARP bailout was initially rejected by the House of Representatives. What do capitalists care about millions losing access to food? They're starving people all over the planet to keep food prices high. Do you think Dow Chemical is alarmed that over 90% of the employees of the Chemical Safety and Hazard Investigation Board have been let go? Let's make it very clear. Millions of people are suffering, and tens of millions more are threatened by the shutdown of government services like the WIC program. These programs have been won through decades of struggle. But the capitalist state hasn't been shut down. The U.S. is still occupying Afghanistan while it continues to threaten Syria. The Pentagon continues to assassinate people with drones. The NSA is spying on everybody. La Migra continues to deport immigrant workers and their children. 37,000 immigrants are locked up in jails, many of whom are run by private, extremely profitable corporations. After 37 years of imprisonment, Native American leader Leonard Peltier is still in federal prison. So is People's lawyer Lynn Stewart, who's dying of cancer. Afia Siddiqui continues to be locked up in federal prison. So do the Puerto Rican political prisoners and the Cuban Five. The capitalist state isn't about helping people with Social Security or food programs. The capitalist state is cops, jails, brutality, and death. And this organized violence on behalf of the rich hasn't been shut down at all. Like Leonard Peltier being locked up, the government shutdown is really a lockout of hundreds of thousands of union workers by the biggest employer of all, the capitalist state. It's a racist lockout of the black city of Washington, D.C. that has been denied statehood for decades because it would mean 2 more African Americans in the U.S. Senate. This lockout is aimed first and foremost at black workers, but it affects the entire multinational working class. During the last 4 decades of deliberate deindustrialization, hundreds of thousands of black workers have been thrown out of steel mills, auto plants, and other shutdown factories. Many of the better-paying jobs still held by African Americans are government jobs. More black workers earning $55,000 or more are employed by the U.S. Postal Service than any other company. African American home-owning neighborhoods like St. Albans, Queens, are filled with public workers. The union-busting campaign against government workers has not been waged by the Tea Party alone. Former Vice President Al Gore went around the country bragging the Clinton administration has fired 100,000 federal employees. What Prince Albert didn't mention was that 47% of those given pink slips were black. It's not just the Tea Party bigots in Congress were allowed to carry out this lockout by big capital. It's not just the billionaire Koch brothers who are pulling the strings. The entire capitalist class is for cutbacks. It's through cutbacks and wars that the rich have gotten through every previous capitalist economic crisis. The capitalist world market was born through the African Holocaust and the extermination of native peoples in the Americas. It also included wholesale attacks on poor peoples in Western Europe. English King Henry VIII hanged 70,000 so-called vagabonds who were really homeless people. 5 centuries later, Moneybags Mayor Mike Bloomberg wants to charge homeless people rent for sleeping in shelters. While African children were being thrown to the sharks in the Middle Passage, workers in what was to be the capitalist states of Western Europe actually decreased in height. That's how severe the cutbacks in food were at the beginning of the capitalist era, particularly during the Industrial Revolution. Just as capitalism was born with cutbacks, it's decaying with even more. The whole Tea Party crew in Congress could be brought to order by Wall Street if it wanted to. House Speaker John Boehner's suburban district is between Cincinnati and Dayton. Procter & Gamble runs Cincinnati. General Electric has a big aerospace plant in Boehner's district, but neither Procter & Gamble nor GE has any inclination to do so. Capital has to expand or die. And the only way capital can even maintain itself during this economic crisis is by stealing even more from the working class, which includes more than 20 million unemployed. Last year, Con Ed conducted a 27-day-long lockout, 24-day-long lockout of its unionized workers. This lockout only ended when a dangerous storm, a derecho, was approaching. The capitalist class needs an electrical system to exploit workers and make profits. But even this necessity took second place to the war against Con Ed workers. Con Ed is the same outfit that removed without a backup a vital feeder cable that powers Metro-North's electric trains in the New Haven line. 60,000 commuters have been affected by this capitalist utility's recklessness. The electrical grid is a prime example of how industry has really socialized production that's strangled by private capitalist ownership. Over the last decades, Con Ed has had a string of electrical blackouts, but this capitalist utility won't fix the problems. There's no profit to do so. The ostensible reason for this government lockout, this shutdown of government services, is the start of the Affordable Care Act. 50 million people without health insurance have been eagerly waiting for this law to take effect. But millions of people who desperately need health insurance won't be getting any help. As Kathy told us, John Roberts and his fellow Tea Party bigots on the Supreme Court allowed the states under Tea Party rule not to increase Medicaid coverage. Immigrant workers won't get any help from this law at all. That's a racist attack on millions of our fellow workers. It's like reinstating Jim Crow hospitals where black patients died going past in ambulances. Right. But our criticism of this law has nothing to do with a Tea Party racist who spat upon Congressman John Lewis. Lewis, who was viciously clubbed by the Alabama state troopers in Selma when he was fighting for voting rights with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Right. King said of all the forms of inequality, injustice in health care is the most shocking and inhumane. For want of a dentist, 12-year-old Diamante Driver died of a toothache on February 25, 2007. The black child died in Prince George's County, Maryland, where tens of thousands of government workers are now out of work because of the government shutdown. Do you think the Tea Party bigots care at all for Diamante Driver or the 50 million people without health insurance? Neither does the entire capitalist class. After decades of demands for public health insurance, the Affordable Care Act was only passed with a whole series of sops and giveaways to Aetna, United Healthcare, and the rest of the gigantic insurance outfits. So why does the capitalist class allow it to be endangered now upon its inauguration? It's sort of like the timid liberal who was summoned to a red-baiting congressional committee during the anti-communist witch hunt. The liberal cried, "Well, I've always been an anti-communist." To which Joe McCarthy would reply, "We don't care what sort of communist you are." Yeah, right. To many in the capitalist class, it doesn't matter that the Affordable Care Act is meager legislation that guarantees even more profits for the medical insurance complex. The super rich don't even want to give the appearance of a reform. All they want is to attack poor people all over the globe. How can we turn this around? Without the masses' intervention, this government lockout and the so-called federal debt ceiling will be used to pass cutback legislation. The Democrats will call this a compromise that we're supposed to be relieved to hear about. It will be a rotten compromise. 2 years ago, President Obama offered $1 trillion in cuts to Social Security and other vital programs. It just whetted the Tea Party's appetite. We need to struggle, and struggle still more. Fannie Lou Hamer didn't wait for the Democratic Party to do something because it was white Democrats who were the ones that tortured her in Mississippi. All through her life, Fannie Lou Hamer struggled. So did thousands of other courageous fighters. That's how millions of workers were organized into unions in the 1930s, and segregation was defeated in the 1960s. We need to build people's assemblies everywhere to fight police killings of poor people, every cutback, and every rich man's war. We need to assemble to free Mumia Abu-Jamal and the Move 9. We need to free C.C. McDonald. We need to build solidarity with LGBTQ people under attack. We need to assemble to bring home the millions of sisters and brothers who are in prison. The Cuban Five must be freed immediately and their jail cells occupied by CEOs of Pfizer, Merck, and the other drug profiteers. We need what people in Cuba have: free medical care, free health care for all. This weekend, the International People's Assembly against the banks and against austerity will be convening in Detroit, a black city that was economically destroyed by finance capital. On October 22nd, people will be rallying in cities around the country against police brutality and mass incarceration. And on October 24th, we'll be fighting for a $15 minimum wage. And we got to fill Herald Square, and we got to go out tomorrow stickering and leafleting. Struggle is the only way we can defend ourselves and our families. Both Herman Wallace and General Giap struggled all their lives. During 47 years of imprisonment, 41 of which was spent in solitary confinement, Herman Wallace never gave up. Neither can we. General Giap showed the people of the world how to defeat the French and U.S. war machines. The capitalist class has shut down government services. We will give Wall Street a Dien Bien Phu, a socialist revolution. Long live the memory of Herman Wallace and General Giap.